So the reality in this world that we live in is that failure is surrounding us at all times, right? All times. That's not what that's supposed to say, right? Kids with gas eat free. Somebody like, kids, hey, we're getting breakfast, lunch, supper, because, man, you guys got gas. Let's go. All right, that's not how the sign's supposed to go. That's not how that's supposed to look. Wow. I don't even know how he did that. I mean, I've driven a lot of golf carts in my life. I've never parked one in the water. I don't even know how they did that. And then this poor guy, right? Failure is imminent. Can you see the smile of his buddy driving the boat? Can you just see that? Oh, man. I mean, failure surrounds us all the time. We are always around failure. Failure is constantly surrounding us. And sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's not so funny. Some of you know that last year I earned my college degree. So I finally finished my college career, which started in 1988. Yep, 1988. I went to college in 1988, and in 1991, that spring, after finishing my junior year, I got hired, and so I never went back and finished, but I regretted it. For 28 years, I regretted it. 28 years, I never went back and finished until 20 years later, I'm like, I got to go finish this. You know why I didn't go back? It wasn't the money, it wasn't the time, it was that. I had all of my gen eds, including both my college math classes to take. And I feared. I really feared college math. But can you do that? Does that make sense to any of you? I was so afraid of failing at college math that I postponed a decision that held me back for decades because I was just so afraid of that. And that's what fear of failing is like, right? I mean, all of you know what it's like to have the fear of failing in your life. And if you give in to this fear of failing, then all of a sudden, like if you don't take the leap because you're afraid of failing, then you miss opportunities. There are plenty of opportunities I could not get because in the field I like to work in, a college degree is the entrance. It opens the door, and if you don't have it, you can't even get in. It's not the same for many fields, but the field that I like to work in, no opportunities. We limit ourselves because of the fear of failure. But the big one that I want you to understand is you miss the chance to see God at work. There's a great book title called If You Want to Walk on Water, You Got to Get Out of the Boat. So it's a reference, of course, to Peter walking on water because he saw Jesus doing it. He's like, hey, I want to do that too. And so, okay, now he failed, but at least he got further than everybody else in history. Nobody else in history besides Jesus got as far as he did because he was willing to take the risk and move forward in light of the chance of failing. So I want you to think about this for you. Do you see any evidence in your life that you are afraid to fail? Are you at the point in your life where you are really reluctant to try new things? You've got your rituals, you've got things going the way you want, and it's hard for you to break out of that because you might fail. Do you avoid failure because you don't want to look foolish? Because isn't that true? You will look foolish. Sometimes when you fail, you will not only look foolish, people will call you a fool. I often find the hardest part about failing isn't what goes on in here, it's what goes on out here, what the people around me say. Sometimes we fall into self-sabotage. Do you ever do this? Do you ever procrastinate on a decision until it's too late and the time has already passed? And then you just can't even do it. So then you can't fail. Or just not even follow through on the opportunity. Perfectionism ever affect you where it's like, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all? Keep it safe, right? Don't step out of your comfort zone. And for some, the biggest issue is your self-doubt. In your mind, you have this constant message that says, I'm just going to fail anyway. For 28 years, I was so scared to take college math because, what if I fail? What if it doesn't go well? What if I can't do it? I got an A and a B in college math. I waited 28 years to get an A and a B. And the whole time, making myself miserable, costing myself opportunities, costing myself the opportunity to see God at work in my life because I just was so afraid of failing. I saw this quote this last week. I put it right here because I thought it was fantastic. Easy choices, hard life. Hard choices, easy life. The easiest choice for me was not to go back to college. Is that easy? Don't go back to college. Yeah, sign me up to not go back. Easy choice, hard life, huge consequences down the road. Hard choice, go back to school. And all the things that have opened up because of that are just so much better. You've got to move past this fear of failure. And that's why we're in this series called Fear Less. It's not that I think you can eliminate fear. It's that we turn the dial down on fear so you have less fear in your life and it controls less of your decisions. That's the goal that we're shooting for. And we're going to talk today about how to overcome this fear of failure. In your program, you have these notes. Would you grab them? If you haven't already done that, grab a pen. And welcome to those of you who are watching online. Love to hear from the people who are watching online. So you have the notes on our website. If you go to our website at penuelchurchlife.com, you can follow along. Let's jump right into this today. So first thing, if you're going to overcome the fear of failure, you have to get the right perspective on failure. It's the first thing that has to happen. You have to get the right perspective. The right perspective on failure. Under letter A, the first thing, if you want to have the right perspective on failure, you've got to normalize failure. And that's where the Bible is so helpful, because the Bible is a book full of people who failed all the time. I have this list in front of me. I couldn't even begin to put all these people or their Bible stories up here or talk to you about them all. But these are all people who failed, and some failed in huge ways. Adam and Eve, big failure. Cain and Abel, big failure. Noah and his sons. Do you know how the story of Noah ends? He gets off the boat and he gets drunk and falls down buck naked, and they have to cover him up. It's like, oh my goodness, this is how this story ends? Are you kidding me? You do all this cool stuff and that's how it goes. It's like on and on and on. The pages of the Bible just filled with people who failed. There's a story, matter of fact, right after the communion story, right after it. Jesus is with his disciples. He's just told them all this is coming. And Jesus says to his disciples, matter of fact, all of you are going to run away from me. You will all deny me. And Peter, if you know the story, Peter's like, I'll never deny you. I will never. Everyone else can run away, Jesus, but I'm your guy. I'm not going anywhere. And Jesus, remember what Jesus says to him? Before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times tonight. And of course, in the story, that's exactly what happens. He fails Jesus, and he runs away because he's so afraid. He denies Jesus. He's so afraid. So the Bible just has so many stories of failure. And again, it's about normalizing failure. And really the key is, say the first one, not the second one. You have the comfort to say, I failed, but not, I am a failure. Do you hear the difference? The second one is a shame message, and it will hold you back. I have failed. Okay. Welcome to the human race. I am a failure. No. No, you're not. You're just a human being. You got to normalize this. Everybody fails. Everybody's going to fail. That's why the Bible is so valuable. One of the reasons why I just love it, it's like, I'll tell you how these people failed. All right. So the first thing is get the right perspective by normalizing it. Now, second, understand that failure is actually the way to success. Some of you know this. Some of you really know this. Others of you are going to learn it. The way to be successful in this world is through failure. That's how you get there. If I were to ask you, if you're a college basketball fan, and I were to ask you who is the most successful college basketball coach in the history of the sport, everybody knows it's John Wooden. So if you like college basketball, you know this. He won 10 championships in 12 years, including 7 in a row. He had 4 teams that never lost a single game in the entire season. As a matter of fact, at one point, they had an 88-game winning streak. I mean, just the greatest college basketball coach of all time. It was incredible. And he said this about failure. If we're afraid to do something for fear of making a mistake, we will not do anything at all. And that is the worst mistake of all. So he trained his players from the beginning to make mistakes. And not mistakes, he said, of carelessness, but of aggressiveness. And he said, if you're not moving forward and you're so afraid of failing that you won't make a mistake, that's the biggest mistake in life. And now, in the world that we live in, with so much harsh criticism, it just seems like people are really becoming tentative. It's like they won't make mistakes, especially if you're so much for this youngest generation. When every decision you make is critiqued on social media constantly, it's like, what shot do you have? It's like, first off, it's normal, and second, it's the only way to be successful. The people I know who are really, really killing it in life, they failed their way to success. So let me give an example. So my stepdaughter, Maggie, likes to bake. And she's pretty good. She has her own baking business. She has orders every single week. So she's done cookies. I mean, that's not an ornament, that's a cookie. Cupcakes, but what she's really doing a lot of lately are cakes. So she's a junior in high school, and she can bake like this. Those are edible, by the way. Those are not like bouncy rubber balls. You can eat those things. I mean, she just amazes. That's a cake. You can eat that cake. I wanted to eat that cake. I couldn't believe it. And then my favorite cake of all, she just did this last week. Look at that. That's a cake. And she's a junior in high school, and she can bake at this level, and they taste even better than they look. And yet, when she first, how many of you think that she just woke up one day and could bake a fish cake? Right? No. Matter of fact, in one of her early experiments, I got permission to tell the story, she destroyed the item she was baking so bad that her mom came in and threw the pan away. Couldn't even say, she's like, there's no point trying to scrub this pan. We'll never get it clean again. It's destroyed. And she threw the pan away. And you go from failure in the early years to now running her own business while she's a high schooler, cakes and orders every single week. You fail your way to success. Does that make sense? You fail your way to success. Now, it's not automatic, but you need to have this understanding. If I'm going to be successful, that means I'm signing up for failure, because I'm just not going to do it right the first time. But the other thing that's really essential to this, and this is brand new, I actually added this in just later in the week when I read this. I'm like, oh my goodness, we have to talk about this. You have to prepare yourself to fail. Again, it's just not what we typically think of, right? But here's what I was thinking when I heard this, and I just thought this was so interesting. This man's name is Tim Ferriss. Did any of you ever watch a TED Talk? These things are amazing. If you go on TED, look him up. Tim Ferriss, F-E-R-I-S-S, I think that's how you spell it. He did a talk on failure, 13 minutes long, so good. And he was talking about all the success he's had in his life and how he had to overcome his fear of failure to get there. And one of the things he put in the video was this. He said, the first thing you do is you say, what if? What if I? So let's say, I want you to think about this. Let's say that you see a job posting for a job that you would really love doing. It would be so exciting for you. You read it and you're like, oh my goodness, I would love this. This is like my dream job. And so what happens is human beings, we tell negative stories, right? Then you read the job description. Do you read job postings lately? It's like the only people qualified are Einstein, Jesus, and Gandhi. That's it. It's like you have to be superstars at everything. It's like, I can never. So what do? We negative attack ourselves immediately. And so he said, well, write it out. What if I apply for that job? And then he said, the first column is you write out everything that could go wrong. Well, I may not get it. Or my current boss, he said, really think about it. My current boss may find out and fire me. Right? So think about every bad thing that's going to be in your mind. You put it all in that first column, and then you think about what could I do to prevent it? Or if something does go bad, what could I do to repair it? So he's like, get ahead of it. Really think wisely about failure. And then, I love this, he said, what might be the benefits of an attempt or a partial success? Because we do negative naturally. We don't do positive naturally. So he said, make yourself think about it. What would be the benefits? Even if you don't get it all the way, what if something good happens? And then I love this too. What's the cost of inaction? Emotionally, physically, financially, if you do nothing and you just stay where you're at. What's that going to do to you? So we want to think about all the negative downsides of taking the risk and attempting it when we might fail, rather than thinking about what are the downsides of staying put and doing nothing. I just thought it was so good that I just added it in just because I loved it and I'm using it, and I'll show you how. All right, so I just have, for time's sake, I have to jump to this next one, because here's what I want. So the first thing is we get the right perspective on failure. Okay, everybody fails, it's normal. I know it's the way to success, and I need to really plan through my failures. But now, The next thing, and these kind of build on each other in terms of importance, you have to handle failure the right way. Because I know plenty of people who are not failing their way into success. Plenty. They are failing their way into more failure. It's not getting any better. So it's not automatic. Just because you failed, you'll be successful. That's not how it works. So again, the Bible has a lot to say about this. The first thing is we need to really be honest. We need to tell the truth. I have no problem being honest and talking about so many of my failures. For instance, I pastored a church in Madison. When I left college to go take that church over. I was there for 6 years and 2 months, and my goal was to transition it into a healthy church, and I failed. Yeah, I completely failed. We started and we were averaging about 25 in attendance. By the time I left, we were averaging around 70 in attendance, and 3 years after I left, it went under. It was a conflict-filled church when I got there. It was a conflict-filled church when I left. I failed. I failed. And here's why this is important. You won't do anything after this unless you can be honest about what you failed at. Have you ever been around a leader who couldn't admit when they failed? It's the most annoying thing in the world. It's a total catastrophe, and what do? They stand up and say, well, we really did good, team. We knocked out, and it was like, there's bodies on the ground everywhere. How can you be saying this? This isn't a success. This is a failure. And they can't honestly say, we failed to achieve our goals. We failed to get this done. We failed with what we said we were going to do. It's like, you can't move forward until you're honest. So I tell you the truth. Here's where I failed. And then I accept responsibility. What part of this failure do I own? I love the honesty of the Bible when it comes to accepting responsibility and failure. James chapter 3 says, we all stumble in many ways. If anyone's never at fault in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. How many of you think you know a perfect man? Right? It's like, be honest. You can't even control your own tongue and the words that come out of your mouth. So you have to accept responsibility. I have failed, I'm going to fail, and so I tell the truth about it, and I accept the responsibility. And have you learned in life that oftentimes what people around you want is not perfection, but they do want honesty? And they sure want responsibility. I read a great story about a young man who learned this. When he was in his 20s, he got out of graduated from law school, and he started working at a huge law firm in downtown Toronto. The only problem was one of the managing partners of this law firm was a man named James, and he was a tyrant. For sport, is how he described it. He would periodically announce, well, I'm going to so-and-so's office, and I'm going to let him have it. And he would march to their office and berate this person for 5 minutes or more so loudly that everyone around them could hear what he was saying to the person. It's like humiliation and shame and ugh. And this was one of the managing partners of the firm where this young kid worked in his first job. So one day, he was assigned a case, and it was one of James's clients. And he went to court that day, he argued the case, and he lost. Came back to the firm, and his buddies were like, hey, how'd it go? And he said, I lost. And they said, oh, James is going to kill you. And so he was young, he didn't know what to do, and so he said, you know what? And he just walked right to James's office, knocked on the door. And James said, well, how'd it go? And here's what the young man said. Well, James, he said, I lost. And he said, but then I did something I hadn't done before. I didn't stop there. I said, I lost, and I take full responsibility for this. Clearly, I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. I let you down, and I let the client down. I should have done better, and I realize this is unacceptable. I apologize. I promise you, I won't let it happen again. I'm sorry, James. He said, at that point, I braced for the tongue lashing that was about to come. Instead, he looked confused. Then he looked at me and he said, well, all right then. Have a good day. Have you learned in life that the majority of people don't want you to be perfect? but they want you to be responsible. Tell the truth when you've done it wrong. Take responsibility. That's what the majority of people, now there are unhealthy people in the world that even if you do that, they're still going to come down hard on you. But the majority want that. But even then, this isn't enough to really have the failure become something positive in your life. You've got to get to this part where you're asking the right questions about the failures. Again, you won't ask the right questions if you won't own it, tell the truth about your failure and accept responsibility. You'll never do this one. There's a great example of this in the Bible, and the story is kind of strange for our modern day America, but here's what happened in Jesus in the book of Matthew. Early on, he has 12 disciples, and he sends them out to all the villages around him, 2 by 2, and he gives them really specific instructions. Don't bring $1, nothing. I want you to go into a town. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. And he gives them real specific instructions, and then he says, and I'm giving you authority over sickness and demons, and you'll have the power to heal people and the power to cast out evil spirits. What did that feel like when he said that? Did they get all tingly? I mean, I don't know. But he gave them this power, and off they went to obey Jesus. And then they come back, and they're just so excited. They're like, even the demons obeyed us. It was incredible. And so they come back after this experience, and their faith is just sky high. And then a short while later, Jesus is off doing something different, and the person comes to the disciples, and there's this unclean spirit, and they're trying to cast the demon out. They can't. Jesus comes later, and he takes care of it. And when the disciples are alone with Jesus, after Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? And he explains, well, this kind only comes out by prayer. They learned something new. But the key question is that, why couldn't we do it? This is what you have to learn to ask when you failed, is why did we fail? I mean, they'd been successful before, and now they failed. Why? What did they not know? What did they not do? This is what you have to get to the point, is where you're asking the right question. Because I'll tell you this right now. Failure will never bring you success automatically. Failure will bring you failure. Success comes when you fail and you're honest about it and you take responsibility, and then you ask the question saying, what do I learn from this failure that I've just gone through? That's when failure turns into something positive. So here's the key question on your notes. What do I learn from this failure? What do I learn from this failure? And flip your notes over on the back. On the back, I put down all of these questions. It says, evaluating our failures. What did I learn? What mistakes were made? Why did it happen? All kinds of questions, and you just want to bombard it. So here's an example of one from my past. One time, I thought it'd be a really cool idea at one of my previous churches to start a Saturday night service. This thing bombed so bad that at our last Saturday night service for this run, nobody came. None. 0 in attendance. Now, I'm not too smart, but I can say that's a failure, right? That failed when nobody comes. So we ended it, and I sat down, and I often call them autopsies. It's a phrase from a book that I read once I love. He says, when you have had a failure, do an autopsy without blame. Okay? You get an autopsy, it's like something died, let's figure out why. So I said, here's my autopsy of my Saturday night service failure. And then I just documented every single thing I could think of for why this failed. And I put down every single reason. And then what I did with this is I went and I shared it with all the leaders and 2 different teams of people, and we poured through this line by line. The learnings that we gained from this allowed us to prevent those kind of failures going forward in the future. These things are essential. You've got to think about your failures and say, what do I learn from this? So I want you to think about this. 2 questions for you. Where are you failing today? Where are you failing? If you have no area of your life where you're failing today, why? Are you playing it that safe? So that's the first question, is where are you failing and what are you learning from it? Because God doesn't waste those opportunities to teach us. So where are you failing and what are you learning from it? All right, so those are all really important. Let me bring you down to the final thing. The final thing I want to say to you about this fear of failure is you have to learn how to replace those fears with God's promises. Replace the fears that you have with God's promises, because I just want you to know that even if you do the first two things, it doesn't mean the fear will go away. If you have the right perspective on fear, you just know, hey, it's normal. Everybody's going to fail, and I'm going to fail, and it's going to be part of my success story someday. Even if you have the right perspective on it, even if you handle the failure the right way, it doesn't mean that the next opportunity that comes along, you won't be afraid. If you want to see someone who was afraid of failing in the Bible, you go to the story of Moses. I just reread this. If you want to, you can write this off to the side of your notes. Actually, it's right there. Exodus chapter 3 and 4. Those are the chapters to read. If you want to read somebody who was so afraid of failing. So if you know the backstory for Moses, he was raised in Pharaoh's palace in Egypt at a time when his people, the Israelites, were slaves in Egypt. The Egyptians had enslaved them. And so, since he was an Israelite, and again, all these special circumstances allowed him to be raised in the Pharaoh's palace, one day he just got tired of waiting for God to deliver him, and so he killed an Egyptian, and he thought that all of the people of Israel would now follow his leadership. We learn that from the New Testament. We learn more of what he was thinking. And so, instead, the next day he saw some Israelites fighting, and they knew what he had done. And all of a sudden, he knew the story of his murder had gotten out, and they weren't going to follow him. And so Moses ran for his life because the rulers of Egypt wanted to find him and kill him. So he goes out in the middle of nowhere, in the desert, and he gets married, and he settles down, and he becomes a sheep herder. And life is over for him, right? He's going to herd 10 sheep because he failed. And then all of a sudden, you know the story. One day he's out tending sheep, and he looks up on this mountain, and he sees this bush that's on fire, and it doesn't burn up. So I was thinking about that this week. One of two things happened, right? Either God made fire that has no heat, which he can do, or God made a wooden bush that could not be destroyed by fire. One of those two things happened. He preserved this bush that was on fire because it never burned up. So Moses goes up to see this sight, and he gets up there, and God speaks to him from the bush, and he says, you're on holy ground, take your sandals off. And he falls down, and the Bible says he's so afraid. And God says to Moses, good news, it's time for the people of Israel to be delivered from slavery in Egypt, and you're my man. You're going to go back to Pharaoh, and you're going to stand in front of him, and you're going to tell him that God Almighty says, let my people go. And if you read the story this week, it's so interesting what Moses does. Moses first who am I to do that? And God says, I'll be with you, don't worry about it. And then he starts protesting with God. That's the word in the Bible, protesting with God. And he protests, and then God gets a little bit more, he's like a little more firm with him. Finally, it says in the story, Moses says to God, send anyone else. The answer is no, God. I will not take this risk. And he literally says no to God. I mean, it's one thing for us to say no to God because we're not standing right next to a bush on fire where God is booming voices speaking to us. That's where he is, in the presence of God. He's literally just seen two miracles in the presence of God right there, and he still says no to God. He's so scared. And God has to the Bible says God got a little angry at him and said, go, you're going to do this. It's like, wow, talk about a reluctant hero. So what was going on? Well, I've taught this so many times. I hope by now, whenever you have emotions like fear, they come from somewhere. Something happens, an activating factor. The belief is instantly formed in your head, and that creates the emotional consequence. So what was it from Moses? Oh, God told Moses, go back and tell Pharaoh to let his people go free. You know what's one interesting part of this story that as I was rereading the story this week? Moses did not know that the people who wanted him dead had all passed away. God tells him that, but only later in the story. So imagine what Moses is thinking when God says, go back to the Pharaoh, the man who wants to kill you. He doesn't know that guy's dead yet, or that the other people around him are dead. God tells him that, but later in the story, it's so interesting. So belief pops into his mind. It's instant. If I go back, I'll be arrested. I'll be executed. I won't be able to do this. And what if by some miracle, God actually does do what he says, and Pharaoh says, yep, you guys can all go. How ridiculous is that, right? Like a Pharaoh's going to do that. But then he starts thinking about, well, we can't do that. We'll starve in the desert. Do you know how many people there were in the nation of Israel? Estimates are between 2 to 3 million Israelites in slavery. How would you feel if God said, I want you to go lead 2 to 3 million people across a desert to the land I've promised to give them? The quartermaster general of the army years ago calculated how much food, like that picture isn't even remotely close to how many people there were. So the quartermaster general of the army calculated how much food Moses would need every single day to feed 2 to 3 million people. Do you know what it is? 1,500 tons of food per day. Or, he said, it's the equivalent of 2 freight trains, each one a mile long, loaded completely with food, every day. Anyone else afraid of failing at that task? It's like, can you see why he was so scared to do this? He was so afraid of failing. There's just 1,000 ways he can fail. I mean, so we will starve in the desert is a real fear, because how are you going to come up with 2 freight trains a mile long each every single day loaded with food? It can't be done, right? It can't be done. We're just going to fail. We're going to fail. And yet God says, go. And again, we stop right here. We have these beliefs, they form in our mind, and then we have the emotional consequence. He was just scared. But you can dispute the negative thoughts in your mind and exchange them for positive. And he could have done this. He could have said, hey, you know what? I'm not alone in this. This wasn't my idea. First time it was my idea. I killed that guy thinking they'll follow me. This time it's God's idea. So God's going to come with me, right? And you could exchange it for positive thought. And I want you to write this down. I didn't put this anywhere, but somewhere on your notes, find a place to write that phrase down. This is the key. When you are afraid and you're looking to dispute and exchange your negative thoughts, you have to ask this question and answer it. What has God promised me? Now, if you read Exodus 3 and 4, you are going to be amazed at all the things God literally promises Moses in that story. I just put a few of them up here. God promises him, I have come down to rescue them from the hands of Egypt. So that's what God promised. God promised, I will be with you. God promised, you will plunder the Egyptians. You know who you plunder? A conquered enemy, right? That's who you plunder. You don't plunder the ones that you haven't beaten. He's like, you're going to beat them so bad, you're going to take plunder from them, and that's how you're going to be able to financially afford to do this. And then he literally says, because Moses is like, I can't speak. And God says, I will help you speak. I will teach you what to say. He actually starts with, who made men's mouths? I did. God. I made it. So I will speak for you. I will show you what to say. So all these promises he could have focused on. And here's what you learn from it. It is the promises of God that give us the ability to move forward despite our fears. That's what I want you to know. That's why I constantly say, if you're scared and struggling and emotions are struggling, where do you go in the Bible? One book, I tell you all the time. What is the book? Psalms, exactly. Biggest book right in the middle, and you read because it's full of the promises of God, and you read until you see something that strikes you. God will give you his promise in that book if you will take the time to listen to it. And then what will happen is that your fear will not go away, but the dial of fear will go way down. And it will give you the courage to move forward because you focus on the promises of God, not the things you're afraid of. So I would have thought, prepping this message this last week, that I literally was thinking, well, you know, this is, I hope, going to help somebody else. And then God gave me just an amazing experience. A couple of weeks ago, I had this really positive thing happen to me. Really positive. This person is like one of my big mentors in life. Said something to me that was like, wow. It was wow. I was so stunned by what they said, and I've got to be a little cryptic here, obviously, because this is recorded and it'll be online. So I was so surprised by what they said about me, and it had to do with my future. And the interesting thing is, even though it was entirely positive, the emotion it created in me, and I felt at the moment she was saying it, it was fear. I was scared. I went home and talked to my wife about it. I'm like, I don't even understand this. Why am I afraid? This is really positive. This is really good. And I'm scared. Well, boy, if only I ever taught a formula on how to identify what's causing the fear. A, B, C. Oh, yeah. So I sat down and I'm like, all right, so I'm feeling fear. That's the C. My emotional consequence. What's the belief in my mind? And the belief in my mind, I started listing them out. Well, you'll fail. You'll fail. You won't be able to do this. You're not ready for that. And as I started listing all the negative beliefs, and again, I wasn't even aware of them. Your beliefs are just instantly in your brain. You don't think about it. It's not like I sat down and said, well, what do I believe about that? Oh, no, your brain tells stories instantly. So I sat down, I listed them all, and I'm like, boy, I can't imagine why I'm afraid. Look at this. So then I started doing what I told you. You can dispute and exchange it. And so I knew what he'd promised. I know that God has promised me things like this. He's promised to guide me. And that's the picture of me and God right there. Because I cannot see. Do you want me to tell you what I see happening in my life tomorrow? I have no idea. Because I can't see tomorrow. Want me to tell you what my life is going to look like in 1 year? I can't see that. But do you know who absolutely can see what my tomorrow is going to be and what my 1 year from now is going to be? God Almighty. And he has promised to guide me by the hand into that future. That's what he's promised me. He's promised me this. You know what this is? This is an artist representation, because we don't have cameras that are capable of showing you this yet, of the synapses in your brain. The synapses in the brain are how messages travel. It's really like, you have all these incredible connections in your brain. Do you know that in the book of James, God says if anyone lacks wisdom and they ask God for wisdom, you know what he promises? He says he promises to make you wiser on your own than you could ever be without him. All you have to do is just ask for it. So it is like my constant daily prayer. I sometimes, dozen times a day, I'm like, make me wise. I don't have wise. It's like, and what he says is like, I will rewire the synapses in your brain to make you smarter with me than you will ever be without me. It's his promise. He can't lie about that. So it's like, he promised to guide me, promised to make me smarter than I am right now, because I'm not smart enough. And then he promised that no matter what comes my way, he will go through it with me. I will never go through it alone. And so these promises helped me, but there were specific actions that I needed to take in order to start moving in this specific direction. And the truth is, I was still scared. I couldn't make the move. I couldn't start. So I grabbed my Bible. And I did what I've told all of you to do over and over again. And I flipped open in the Bible and just started reading. And I had to read 3 chapters before I finally came to the verses that were just for me. The promise that I needed. And I put it up here. God says, I am always with you. You hold my right hand. And you guide me with your counsel. And the moment I read those words, I grabbed my notebook, I wrote them out, and I'm starting to memorize them, because there's my promise. So my prayer goes like this now. God, here's this really cool thing. I'm scared to do it. I'm scared to move forward with this. But here's what you promised me. You said you are going to hold my right hand, and you are going to lead me and guide me with your counsel. So thank you for your promise to me. Because this means that I'll be just fine. And after I found that promise, I all of a sudden, like I said, the dial on fear went down so low that I started taking the steps I needed to take. I started doing what I needed to do. I had the courage and strength to do it. I didn't have it until that. I wish I could tell you that you could live without any fear in this world, but I don't think that's possible, not in our crazy world. But what I do believe is that if you will turn your attention to what God has promised you, he will give you courage and strengthen you to take the next step so you don't give in to the fear of failure. So what's the next step for you? A couple of things. First, really think about this today. Do I have the right perspective on failure? Am I the only one in here today that is afraid to try something new? I hope not. But if not, I learned a lot from this. So think about that for you. Is there something that you really feel like God is pushing you to try or attempt, and you've just been saying no to him? And really think about this. Where am I failing today? And what do you own from that? And what do you learn from that? And again, if you're not failing at anything, why? Why are you not failing at anything? Have you just made your life so simple and repetitious that there's no place for God to intervene in that and say, hey, I want to put you on a new path? And when you're afraid, The promises in the book of Psalms will give you courage time after time after time. And when you're reading, you read it until something's like, oh, okay. And then you write that down and you put it everywhere. And every time you're afraid, you go back to what he's promised you. I literally have this image of God. Hey, he's got my right hand. Here's my right hand. You got it. Thank you that you're going to guide me. I'm going to do what is in front of me because you're with me. Let me have you finish by bowing your heads as we finish up today. You know, I talk about this God being a personal God who will guide you, but that personal relationship begins with a step of faith. You have to move toward him. And we've talked a lot today about Jesus and how great he is and what he's done for us on the cross. And in our communion service earlier, we talked about his blood and poured out for our forgiveness. And this is where it all starts. If you will put your trust in Jesus and ask for his gift of forgiveness in life, he will forgive you, but more than that, he will come to be your personal guide through life. Would you like his gift of forgiveness and eternal life today? Just say something like this in your heart to him. Say, Jesus, I turn to you. I don't have this all figured out yet, but I know I'm not perfect. Please forgive me. Make your home inside of me today and be my new guide through life. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks everybody for coming. I hope you have a wonderful week.